So I was terrified that if I really did find some success in anything, whether it's in relationships or in business, etc., in career, I would for sure screw it up. So I was terrified. Welcome back to the Struggle and Strive podcast. My name is Estil Wallace. We're unpacking the 12 steps, and today we're going to talk about steps 4 and 5. If you don't have a study guide and would like one to follow along, just hop over to struggleandstrive.co and you can get your free downloadable study guide. Probably a good opportunity to give you another disclaimer that I don't represent any other particular 12-step fellowship or anything like that. I only represent this podcast. I'm just some dude that's read the big book and I'm trying to share this stuff with you. That being said, let's jump right into it. Step 4, moral inventory. Made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. The purpose of the inventory is to really unpack 3 things that ail most people. We're talking about resentments, fears, and sexual behavior. That's really at the heart of it. So without digging into too much of the whys and all that stuff, I'm going to get right into how we do a resentment list. So this is an opportunity to throw this graphic on the screen and you can see a resentment list that I've just made. So it's got 3 columns, just the way it's done in the big book. The first column is who I'm resentful at. The second column is the cause. And this is where I want to paraphrase, not write paragraph after paragraph. And in the third column, it's the affects my column. And here it's going to affect one of 5 areas, either my self-esteem, how I feel about myself, my ambitions, my plans for the future, my financial security, my personal relationships, and my sexual relationships. Those are the only 5 areas that we're going to be discussing as being affected by this resentment. So if you're following along with the study guide, you'll see or in this video, we should have the graphic up and you can see my first resentment is against my mother. What's the cause? She left me in foster care when I was an infant. Okay? What does that affect? That affects everything. It affects how I feel about myself. It affects my plans for the future. It affects my financial security because I had $0. I was not very good at earning money yet. Also, it affects my personal relations. And it ultimately affected my sex relations for a long, long time. And I'd like to just make a quick stop on that. Think about who the role mother plays. Mother in your life is ultimately the extension of God. They're everything. The mother to an infant is everything. It's their voice we hear first when we're in the womb. It's their touch. It's their embrace. In many cases, it's their physical feeding from their bodies. It's how we grow and how we're nurtured and become attached to our very first human in the world. And for me, being a mother-son relationship, that relationship was ripped apart was when I was only weeks old. That had long-lasting detrimental effects to the way I operated with women. This isn't a therapy session for me. We're not going to unpack my whole sex inventory, but suffice it to say that I had troubled relationships up until I got into recovery and really started applying this stuff to my life. Second resentment, former employer fired me for underperformance. It affected my self-esteem, my financial security, and my ambitions. Didn't really affect much else. Then I put down myself, because I think that's one that can be overlooked. I resented myself for ruining my relationships, ruining job opportunities, educational opportunities, and basically ruining my whole life. That affected everything, my self-esteem, my ambitions, my financial security, personal relations, and sex relations. And that resentment list is done. Now, if you're doing this for the first time, I would recommend do a 3-column list and list everyone you can think of that you hold a resentment against from the beginning of your earliest memories until now. So if you've never done it before, that might be, and depending on how old you are, that might be a list of 30 to 50 names. If it's a list of over 100 names, you need this more than you probably realize. In my recent past, in the last 10 years, let's say, I don't ever get past 1 or 2 names. So I just use 3 names in this example, just so that you get the gist of how to do it. Then we go into a fears list. Now this is really, really simple. I'm just doing a 2-column list here. What do I fear and why do I fear it? Now, if you really are, deathly afraid of spiders or something, I guess you can put that down. But I'm putting down more deeper rooted fears like failure I put down, and I put down why, because I failed so much in my life when I did this the first time. I put down I was very afraid of success. On my first handwritten fear list 20 years ago, I wrote down success because I was afraid I was going to screw it up. I'd never really been successful at anything, at all. So I was terrified that if I really did find some success in anything, whether it's in relationships or in business, etc., in career, I would for sure screw it up. So I was terrified. I was terrified to do well at things. Another big fear is being alone. I think most people, next to public speaking, another big fear is being alone because I want to share my life with somebody. So there's nothing else that I need to do in this list. Just make the list. We're going to talk about step 5 as we go through this. So when I take step 4 into 5 and I'm admitting this and sharing this with another person, hopefully it's a sponsor or somebody that I trust that's been through this work before. When they look at the fears, what they're going to find is we fear things primarily because we have self-reliance. And self-reliance fails us. That's where fear comes from. Think about every fear you have or have ever had. It really comes down to things that you either are sure are beyond your control or you even suspect are out of your control, which is a lot of things. So a lot of people have a lot of fears because they don't, there's a lot of things out of their control. When we go through step 5 with somebody who's been through this process, what we usually get shown is that there's another way to go. Rather than just being cocky and pretending that nothing scares us or being petrified in fear, there's a third route. The third route is trusting and relying upon God. I'm going to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, and God's going to handle the rest. He's going to sort out the rest. He's going to make sure that I get from A to B in one piece. That's a big leap of faith. But in doing that, if I'm looking at the next challenge in my life that I could be afraid of through that lens, well, then I'm just going to move my feet and do the next right indicated thing that I'm supposed to do, whether anybody's watching or not, and trust that He's going to carry me through that situation, through that circumstance, through that challenge. That becomes the relationship. Now I'm outgrowing fear. All of a sudden, I'm starting to realize that I can do all kinds of things that I didn't think I could do before. And that would definitely be the case in the timeline of my time in recovery. I put in here, instead of doing a sex inventory, and I'm not saying you shouldn't do a sex inventory. If you've got a long sexual history, I think it's probably a good idea to do a sex inventory. The book asks several questions that you can put into like a 6-column inventory, and you can sort of look at each relationship to look at where was I selfish, where was I at fault in certain situations. And it's good to get that down because what we're looking for isn't like shame or guilt, like, oh, I was such a bad person. It's really to identify behavior patterns. And underneath those behavior patterns are character defects, which we're going to learn more about as we go through the steps, which is really what the purpose of step 5 is. When you do it with somebody, a mentor, a sponsor, somebody who's been through it, they're going to be able to quickly identify the patterns and say, yeah, this is what's happening here. It's happening over and over again in your life. So rather than unpack the entire sex inventory on this video, what I wanted to do is show you something I've been doing more and more in recent years, which is the guys that I work with, instead of inventorying every past relationship, we look at the future, we look at new relationships, and we use this format. I create a 3-list inventory of what the future looks like. So I do a list of my ideal characteristics. These are just some examples: honest, hardworking, supportive, good listener, doesn't always try to solve others' problems. Ask my wife how I'm doing on that one. Financially supports myself and the people around me. I'm a good provider. I take care of myself, takes care of my physical and mental health. These are the things I would write down for my ideal self, for the next version of myself. Then I do another list of my ideal mate's characteristics. So let's say I'm single, and I was when I went through this process, and I had not met my wife yet. I met my wife when I was 3 years sober. So I created a list of my ideal mate's characteristics, and while they were very similar and there was a lot of overlap, they're not identical. I put honest, hardworking. I put down has own friend group. It's important. Doesn't hold grudges. Takes care of herself mentally, physically, and her health. Wants to raise children. I wanted a woman who's emotionally stable, is able to persevere through difficult times. In this example that you're seeing on the screen, I only put a handful of suggestions for examples. I would recommend take time, pray, be quiet, be alone, and really fill this out. Fill out dozens and dozens. The clearer you can get on the picture of who you want to be, the more you bring that into your sphere of attention, into your focus, and that becomes what you're looking for. So many times, myself included in the past, what I'm looking for is to solve loneliness or to get laid, right? So many times trying to just, sleep with a new partner or get into a relationship so I'm not alone, that doesn't really, there's no checks and balances involved in that. You find somebody you're attracted to, next thing you know, you're in a relationship. That doesn't have any intention behind it. So what we're talking about with the ideals is to create some intention, and then my hope is, and my challenge for you would be to, if you're single that is, date with intention so that you can find a suitable mate. The third list that's part of this inventory of the future is deal breakers. These are the red flags I hope you don't paint green. That happens a lot in relationships. You get into a relationship with somebody, you think they're cute, they think you're cute. You go out a few times, you seem to like all the same stuff. There's so much in common. Next thing you know, you guys are living together and her car's in your name and your phone's attached to her account and you guys have a dog and you guys are just completely enmeshed, right? It's just a big smattering, and who cares? It doesn't matter because you guys are in love. Well, maybe a year into it or 2 years into it, you realize that this person has a crippling drug habit. You're now sober, and this person is really struggling. Maybe you realize that this person has a serious anger problem. Not just anger, is rageful, blames you for everything. Maybe you've gotten into a committed relationship with somebody who's abusive physically. Maybe you've gotten into a relationship that's committed with somebody who cheats on you constantly. Maybe there's a lot of ways relationships go sideways. What we want to list are some deal breakers. I put down, just as examples, active addiction, infidelity, criminal behavior. I was 2-3 years sober, dating with intention, not sleeping with the women I was dating. I was trying to see if I could be the type of man that could attract the type of woman I wanted, and then see if I could find the kind of woman I wanted. And I had a few things that I really didn't want that I was already familiar with. And criminal behavior is on that list. I got to tell you, I'm not trying to go out on a date with somebody and then find out, she's got warrants for arrest. That's super sketchy, not who I'm trying to build a life with. Let's go into step 5 and cover sort of the back end, the open loops on step 4. Step 5 is admitted to God, to ourselves, to another human being, the exact nature of our wrongs. And the purpose is to get this stuff out into the light of day. You don't have to publish it online. That's not the point of it. The point of it is to find the patterns where my self-destructive behavior has been a pattern, where I've ruined relationships and jobs, and I've harbored hate and grudges for long times. That's the stuff that's driven by fear. It's driven by self-seeking behavior, my unmet expectations of other people, by my selfishness, by my dishonesty, the things that I want to hide in my life. That's what's caused these behavior patterns, and they become patterns because I've done them over and over and over again. That's what this inventory is about. Let's shine some light on this. This isn't the surgery. This is the diagnostic work. We're trying to see what needs to be removed. We're just taking an inventory. We're just having a look to see what's been eaten Gilbert grape, huh? For the 5th step, if you want to bring this next graphic back on the screen, here you'll see the same resentment inventory, but this time I found what the book refers to as my part in each resentment. So what I like to do when I take a man through the steps is I listen to the resentment, I listen to them share about the circumstance or the experience of the relationship, and then I watch, is it selfish? Is it self-seeking behavior? Is there dishonesty? Or is it fear that's driving this? So let's unpack the 3 that I left in my example. The first one, my mom left me in foster care. Okay, so what's my part? I was an infant. I wasn't dishonest. I wasn't self-seeking. I wasn't selfish. So what is my part? Well, I did my inventory the first time I was 26, almost 27 years old. So what's my part at 27 years old? Every day past 18, my part becomes holding a resentment. There's an old adage that holding a resentment is like taking poison and expecting the other person to die. And that was true for me. I held on to this grudge against my parents for so long. They're alcoholics and their lives were upside down and unmanageable, and they left me. It is what it is. There's nothing I can do about that to change that. Now, I was super mad about it for a long time, and I used it as an excuse. I used it as part of my narrative for self-destruction, that I was just like them, that I wasn't any better than them, et cetera, et cetera. But looking at it with another person who's got God in their life, who wants the best for me, who's guiding me through this work, who's done this work themselves, they're pointing out to me, you've been holding on to this resentment into adulthood. Hopefully I could get to they suggest that hopefully you can get to a place where you can accept that they, under the circumstances of their life, they did the best they could with what they had, which was leave me in the care of other people. Now, I can tell you from personal experience, I still ended up in therapy many years later, and it took me a long time to really get to a place of 100% forgiveness for my mother. But I didn't have to get through therapy to get through this inventory. He told me, man, you're destroying your life by holding on to this resentment and hanging on to this part of your story. She left you? Yeah, a lot of people grow up without moms, bro. And it allowed me to reframe it enough that I was able to stay sober and not sit around like the Grinch hating her all day. Same thing with my boss, my former boss. My part, self-seeking. What is self-seeking versus selfish? This is an interesting question that I get asked. This is the way it was explained to me, and this is the definitions I like to adhere to. Selfishness is it's mine and I don't want to share it. We're talking about time, affection, resources, money. Self-seeking is it's yours and I want it. It can mean money or things like that, but most often that I see, both in my inventory and in the inventories of men that I help, I see self-seeking is expectations of others. I expect other people are going to respond to me a certain way. They're going to behave a certain way. They're going to read off of a script that's only in my mind. Just like the actor in step 3, right? Just like the actor who wants to be the director. Why aren't people doing what I think they should? Self-seeking, that has led to most of the resentments that were in my first couple of inventories. Almost completely with the exception of like my mom and a couple other things that happened to me when I was a kid. Most of the rest of it was people didn't behave the way I thought they should. People still don't behave the way I think they should. Let's be real. The world's a big, crazy place. Some would say it's getting worse. That being said, am I going to consistently live in a world that I wish were different, completely unattached to reality? Or am I gonna give the world permission to just do what it's doing? It doesn't need my permission to carry on. That's a tough question. It sounds silly when I frame it that way, but giving the world permission to just be the crazy ass place it is without my interference, it brings a lot of relief. I don't have to have unmet expectations of everyone. I'm assuming anybody who's watching this probably hasn't done work that deep. We're talking about like, hey, so the person you wanted to be voted for president didn't make it? Like, really, you're gonna let that ruin your year? Like, what, your wife doesn't give you the attention you think you deserve? Your boss doesn't pay you as much money as you think they owe you? Like, these are the real common ones that I hear come up over and over again. It's the government, it's my wife, it's my boss. If you're living in a world that you wish were different, I have horrible news for you. You are slipping slowly into insanity, measurably. That's no longer a place rooted in reality. So what I want to do is I want to identify, like, dude, I do this all the time. I put these expectations on people, they don't meet them, and it starts to become clear. Look at my next resentment. Myself. I put on here selfish, because I'm selfish with how I treat myself. I'm selfish. And I'm self-seeking, and I'm dishonest. This is where we talked about that a little bit in the episode on step 1. We talked about, my dishonesty with myself, this where I sell myself bullshit and then I buy it. Also fear. How many decisions have I made based on trying to, socially engineer the outcome of a situation because people won't do what I want them to do, right? Self-seeking and fear go together really, really well. They pair together very insidiously. So the idea with a 5th step is not to be, pointing the finger at myself of guilt and shame. It's to acknowledge, like, yes, the world is a rough place. We're not here to absolve anyone who's harmed you from what they've done. I want to be clear about that because I've heard a lot of inventories, and there are some I've heard that are absolutely horrifying. Some of the things particularly that have happened to people when they were children. I'm not here to tell you that doing an inventory and finding your part is about forgiving and forgetting. It's not about that. It's not about conflict resolution. It's not about changing the past. It's about acknowledging this happened, this is how I was affected, and this is how I've allowed it to live on in my life. That's what this is about. What are the things I can do something about that I haven't been? Holding a resentment against my mother who left me has just, it ruined my adult life until I was conscious of the fact that I was doing it. And even though it didn't fix itself overnight, I stayed sober. I lived to learn and learn to love again and learn to love in healthier ways another day, another month, another year, and my life healed. That's what can happen. We identify these patterns, and I have something to take to God. I now have a route forward where I can actually heal, where I can actually become a stronger, better, more resilient version of myself. Thank you guys, and we'll look forward to seeing you in steps 6 and 7.